So we have David Reilly, and you're out of Undisputed Tucson. So thank you so much for your time today, and
My
excited
pleasure.
to get to know you and the school a little bit. So, David, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. So I'm a third degree black belt, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Started training Jiu-Jitsu in 2001. So a while ago, I was a junior in college at the time. I was going to University of Kentucky. And back then, I mean, that was before, honestly, like the big wave that kind of came through America. So
Yeah.
I remember when I first started training jiu-jitsu, I'd get back from a class. And back then it wasn't even like a formal jiu-jitsu class. We would do
Right.
30 minutes of ground and 30 minutes of stand up. And I learned really quickly that I would just force myself to get through the stand up part of the
Yeah.
class, just in anticipation of the grappling component. So I really kind of fell in love with the concept of grappling, at least, way back then, and didn't do any
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu or anything like that. That was in Lexington, Kentucky. And I remember coming home, and I had roommates at the time, college roommates, and nobody really even knew what jujitsu was.
Right.
It wasn't like the UFC rocking back then or
Yeah.
anything like that. So I'd get home and I'd have roommates saying, like, hey, man, show me something from that karate class that you're doing,
Yeah.
and nobody even really knew the term jujitsu. So I spent so much time just trying to like educate my friends outside of that community what I was doing.
Yeah.
And then a couple years later, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee. So that was in like right around 2003, and that's when I met Sean Hammonds, who at the time actually had just gotten his purple belt from Lloyd Irvin. And
Mm.
so I started training with them 2003, put the gi on, and then just fell in love with the gi,
Yeah.
and started training avidly. I started competing really quickly, when I first
Yeah.
went to jiu-jitsu.
Cool.
That was kind of at least the ground, the base of how I got into it.
Right. That's awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
And so did you always have dreams of opening up a school and becoming an instructor?
Yeah. So I remember in 2003, I remember sitting in a car outside of the studio with my coach, with Coach Sean. And I remember telling him at the time, like I was, 23-ish, give or take.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I'm going to get my black belt in jiu-jitsu. And I
Yeah.
remember back then, Coach Sean telling me like he had already been in for like 6 or so years as a purple belt. And he was like, man, I'm glad to hear that, but it's such a long road. And I was like, no, man, this is what I want to do. I really want to get my black belt. And at the time, I never really thought, oh, I want to own my own
Yeah.
down the road. It was just, hey, I've definitely loved this and I want to see this through, to completion. And it was probably about 3 or 4 years later where I was like a blue belt, maybe very beginning stages of purple belt, something like that.
Hmm.
That I remember somebody, I was sitting with them and it was a wealthy business owner that just happened to be a member of the gym. And we were sitting
Yeah.
around after class talking. And I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. You know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love jiu-jitsu, all that kind of stuff. I was working at a gym, selling gym memberships and stuff at the time. And I remember he asked me the question. He's like, if you won the lottery, standard question, but like if you won the lottery and you didn't have to worry about money, what would your day look like? And I
Great
remember,
question.
right. And I remember thinking like, oh man, I would do jujitsu. I would hang out with jiu-jitsu people, and that's probably about it. Yeah, that would be an ideal day for me. And so he was just like, man, I would spend the rest of your time trying to figure out how you can make that happen. And for me, that was just done, light bulb.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I was lucky enough to get involved into foreclosed real estate when
Yeah.
the housing market collapsed in 2008.
Hmm.
So I, bought and sold a few foreclosed properties, and I was able to raise a little bit of capital. And so finally, around 2009, 10, I was in that like, oh, now I'm ready. I'm ready to either start a
Yeah.
program or buy a program or what have you. And that's what predicated to my move, to Arizona in 2011.
So cool. I love that. Chills, chills.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
it was
okay.
awesome.
So it's one thing to love training and jujitsu, but it's a whole nother thing teaching it. So did you have any experience teaching before you started
Yeah,
or open up? Oh,
right. So I was a brown belt in 2011 when I got the opportunity to move to Arizona, and it was actually just such like a serendipitous moment that happened on social media. I found
yeah.
out about somebody trying to sell a gym in Tucson, Arizona when I was living in Louisville, Kentucky. And at the time, I had only taught, like filled in. Like if somebody,
Yeah,
the
right.
instructors at the gym that I was training at couldn't teach, I would teach for them. But I
Right.
never had like my own class, or you know what I mean. I never really had that
Yeah.
like a bunch of experience in coaching or teaching.
Yeah.
But I was positive that it was something that I was going to do. So, only way to
Yeah.
get into it is to just get into it, right? So
Right.
I spent about a year before I moved out here just honestly trying to learn from some great instructors to get an idea for what's a good way to structure a class. So what's a good format
Yeah.
class, and just what's better, a 1 hour class or a 90-minute class or a 2 hour class, and just how do they handle beginning students versus adult students versus kids, and how do they structure those classes. So there was just so much that I didn't know about, the operational aspect to running a jiu-jitsu business.
Right.
I knew I loved it. I was an
Yeah.
avid competitor, definitely wanted to have my own team, all that kind of stuff. But I really wanted to make sure that I had some sort of foundation to be
Right.
able to bring with me, so that when I got there, I'd have a bit of a plan in place. It wasn't just, oh, well, I guess I'm just
Right.
teaching jujitsu now.
Yeah.
How can we structure these programs so that they're conducive to bringing in new people? They can get their start, and then how do we keep them engaged over the
Yeah.
course of like a decade to help them get to like their black belt?
Right.
Yeah.
So you did enjoy teaching
Yeah. Oh yeah, I
at
love it.
first. Okay.
Yeah, I love teaching. Loved it. Right.
Yeah.
Now I'll admittedly say that I probably loved it a lot because all I ever did was fill in every now and then. Right.
Yeah.
I
Right.
didn't know what it was like yet to have to come up with a lesson plan
Right.
week after week, month after month, year
Yeah.
after year, so that you can keep people engaged and excited and all that stuff.
Right.
So there was definitely a steep learning curve, when I got into full time instruction.
Yeah, I mean, that's super challenging, especially you're working with so many different people, you're working with kids. Not everybody learns the same way. So,
Right.
yeah, for
And that's
sure.
just it, right? Like, my experience, I'd competed my entire jujitsu career for the first 20 straight years, always
Hmm.
just competing as much as I could. And so for me, that was a huge part of my jujitsu, was competitive
Yeah.
jujitsu. And so
Yeah.
when I moved to Arizona, I was 31 and body still felt really good, so I was still competing all the time. And so it just seemed as though I tried to create kind of an epicenter for competitive jujitsu in Tucson. When I first moved there, there was a few people that competed, but it definitely wasn't, we didn't have a really strong competitive jiu-jitsu program in Tucson, Arizona. And so
Yeah.
all of my energy and attention was guided right towards that, to building a competitive program. And
Right.
it took me years to figure out how to do that, while at the same time creating a program that honestly, as a gym owner, can put food on my table, and
Right.
my mortgage and the car payments and all that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it took me a while to figure out how to juggle
Hmm.
hobbyists, with like people that were super serious and intent
Right.
on being like a competitive jiu-jitsu person.
Right. 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 Well, it seems like you put so much thought into everything, like
Yeah.
even before like opening up your school. So that's awesome to hear. But let's talk about your competition experience. Can you share
Yeah.
a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So when I first got into jiu-jitsu, for me back then, it was actually like, this was kind of before MMA. It was NHB, or no holds barred, so
Yeah.
just tape on the wrist, bare knuckle fighting. That's kind of what was going on,
Yeah.
in the environment. And so my first real big reason to get into jiu-jitsu was I wanted to fight. I wanted to get into MMA and everything. And then really quickly I learned I don't enjoy getting punched in the face at all. I despise it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I knew I still wanted to get some sort of competitive component from doing this stuff. I just wasn't really sure what that looked like. And so when I
Yeah.
moved to Nashville, with Team Lloyd Irvin, honestly, they were ultra competitive. So pretty much the moment I touched down in Nashville, like 3 months after I moved there, I started competing. So I was
Nice.
a white belt, obviously, started competing then and fell in love with it and competed every single year, year after year, throughout every single belt as much as I
Nice.
possibly could. I was a purple belt
Awesome.
for about 4 years. And so I got probably, the most amount of competition I kind of feel like was, at least through at that point until I got to black belt, was my purple belt years. I
Yeah.
like in 2009, I took a bronze medal in the pans as a purple belt, and
Nice.
pans. And then the following year, I went back as a purple belt again, and took a silver medal as a purple belt in
Nice.
2010. Yeah, and so felt really good. And then when I hit brown belt, I had my first, I guess what you would call like a competitive slump, you know. And so, dude, my first whole year as brown belt, I competed all the time, and I think I only won like maybe one or two matches,
Oh,
and so it was a struggle.
yeah.
And dude, I honestly got to a point where I was like, fuck, maybe I shouldn't be competing as, maybe I'm not good enough to be.
Makes you question everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but I obviously wasn't going to give up. I was still
Right.
committed
Of
to
course. Yeah.
competitive jiu-jitsu. So kept going. And when I got my black belt, I'll never forget my first black belt match. It was actually at the Pan Ams against Thiago Ramos, who, real good competitive Brazilian jiu-jitsu player. And
Mm-hmm.
I beat him by 2 points, very first match as a black belt. And I was
Nice.
just elated. So coming off a
Yeah.
really long losing streak,
Yeah.
definitely was questioning whether or not I
Yeah.
should even be a black belt,
Yeah.
competing as a black belt. Felt like my coach had absolutely made a mistake. I was not ready for that. I never really
Mm-hmm.
proved myself as a brown belt, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But so thankful that he kind of saw that little jump was going to be beneficial for me, because it just
Yeah.
immediately, I just grew into the belt like right away.
Love it.
Yeah, yeah. And then after that, I fought Shami Budashan the next round, and he hit me with a flying triangle. So it was
Oh
one of those like all
God.
I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that was rough. But luckily, I had that first W, under my
Yeah.
belt, that I at
There you
least
go.
feel good about myself. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like a total loss going home.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that sparked, obviously, just for my first like 6 years at black belt, I was trying to compete as much as I could. Competed.
And do you still compete?
I competed right up until 2020. So I stopped competing at the end of
Oh,
2018.
okay.
And I just had, in all honesty, a lot of those years just really caught up with me. I've got
Mm-hmm.
skin loss syndrome, which is like
Oh.
hyperelasticity in my skin and joint tissue. And so it
Mm,
just makes me a little bit more prone to certain injuries. So
right.
I've separated both my shoulders a handful of times and popped knees
Yeah.
and stuff, which is common, right,
Right.
with that genetic disease. But so long story short, I honestly am right now in that stage, at 45 now. I've had so many of these conversations with other, especially Arizona coaches, like some of
Mm-hmm.
us that have kind of come up in the competitive scene over the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
It's really tough now to get my body to a place where I can push it at a competitive level. You know,
Right.
I had
Yeah.
stem cell therapy done on both my shoulders and both my knees in 23, just
Did
trying
that help?
to get my body back. And it helped a little, but,
Oh, okay.
you know, definitely not enough to get me to a point where I feel like I can push myself, right?
Yeah.
So I've kind of had that, that age old dilemma that I think every athlete, as they kind of morph into full-time coach, really experiences,
Yeah.
that like, who am I in this world of competitive jujitsu anymore? If I'm not an avid competitor, am I just a full-time coach now? So those are the things that
Right.
I've been wrestling with personally over the last few years,
Yeah.
just kind of morphing into the life of a coach as opposed to the life
Mm-hmm.
of a competitor.
I mean, you do this for 10 or so years. Obviously, it's going to take a toll on your body. So, anything, right? I mean, and
That's
jujitsu is so hard on the body. So,
so hard on the
totally.
body. Yeah.
Especially if you're competing all the time, which
Right.
you have.
Right.
So,
Well, and it's funny because I think the way in which we prepare nowadays for
oh,
a
yeah.
competitive jujitsu journey is quite
Mm-hmm.
different than how
Oh,
we did 20 years ago.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially with MMA and things, right? Like
Yep.
that whole, like, I remember just every single round in class was a tournament round. Like
Yeah.
every single round you were going for broke, and that was 5 days a week, twice a day, with strength and conditioning,
Yeah.
in that as well. And it just gets to the point where your body's like, oh wow. It's funny when I talk to people that are starting their jiu-jitsu journey and they do want to be ultra competitive,
Yeah.
I have like this nice little kind of preemptive warning speech
Yeah.
that,
Right.
that comes
Good. Yeah.
as a coach, and that's do everything you can to take care of your body off of the mats, you know? Like
Which is, I mean, easier said than done. I mean,
so much so.
you can do all the things, but if you're just training and training and training, like your body, I mean, it's a machine, but it's not, it's not that
Yeah.
good.
Right. Yeah. And it needs
Yeah.
the right care and maintenance,
Right.
as you
Right.
progress. And if I had my journey to do all over again, I think I went through a little period where my body was really sore all the time, but I think
Yeah.
I almost regretted a lot of my competitive jujitsu, truthfully, just
Mm,
because it was like, man, I've got a 3-year-old now. And so
yeah,
honestly, bending over
for
to pick up
sure.
my 3-year-old can be a
It's like
challenge.
now you feel it. Now you
Right.
feel all the things.
Right.
Yeah.
You feel all the things.
Yeah.
Exactly. But now I've kind of reshaped that feeling. And it's more so I wished I would have prepared a lot smarter for all the
There
different
you go.
events. So there's ways
Right.
you can push yourself
Mm-hmm.
from a cardiovascular perspective, right? So you can still build your gas tank, which is super
Mm-hmm.
important,
Yeah.
especially if we're talking 10-minute adult black belt matches, right? Like you got to be able to have a full gas tank when you go in, or you're just
Right.
doing yourself a disservice.
Right.
But there's ways you can build your technique and still push your gas tank without constantly putting your body through so much strain in practice that by the time you get to competition, you're fighting through injuries that you picked
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
like I was talking to a friend of mine who's a fourth degree black belt under Carlson Gracie Jr. that has a gym in Kentucky. And we just had a catch up phone call a few,
Yeah.
a few months ago. And it was like, how you doing? Good. How's the body? Like, it's good. His shoulders are kind of bothering me. Knees are a little bit rough. Lower back kind of hurts. My neck's a little stiff. Other than that, and like, how about you? And he'll run through a litany of things that he goes,
Right.
man, when's the last time that you were asked that question that you could say, oh, I feel 100%?
Oh,
Probably 20 years ago before I started jiu-jitsu.
yeah.
you know
Yeah.
so but the trade-off is always there. The other, it's like, find one athlete out there that stayed committed to a sport for 20 years and show me a perfect body that's held up.
No, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You kind of just have to deal with it. It's
Yeah.
either you deal with it or you just don't do anything and
Right, that's it. Like battle
be
scars.
out of shape and sit on the couch and, who wants that life? Not
Right.
us.
Right. Right. So I think that, now that jiu-jitsu is so much more popular, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're getting so many more people that honestly would have never tried jiu-jitsu before. Now
Right.
they're trying it out,
Yeah.
especially people over the age of 35, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and so I'm glad that we've really started to kind of understand that really hard, like just full out training all the time is not good for your body. So,
Yep.
developing programs now for people like that still want to compete, but still have to be able to, be a lawyer on Monday or,
Yep.
go do your mechanic job and not have to feel like you can't move because you're so
Yeah.
sore from your jujitsu and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Right. Right.
finding ways for people like that to enjoy what we do as well has been
A
really
hundred
great.
percent.
Yeah,
Do you think that competition is for everybody?
absolutely
What are
not.
your thoughts? No. Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Well, can anybody compete if they want to? Sure.
Hmm.
Do I think that we should encourage everyone who doesn't even have that as part of their initial goal set when they came in to compete? Then, for me, the answer as a coach is no, right? As an instructor and stuff, because honestly, it's rare that I get people that come in that say, "Hey, I'm doing this because I want to compete in jujitsu." Right?
Right. That never
Usually,
happens. Yeah.
right. Usually, those people are a lot younger, right?
Yeah.
So people that, like, a lot of the times we'll get the guys or girls that have wrestling backgrounds, that are fresh out of high school,
Okay. Yep. That
not
explains
quite
that.
good enough to
Yeah.
wrestle at college. So they just
Mm-hmm.
want an avenue to continue to compete. Like,
Right.
sure, those guys are great, right? And
Yeah.
great. Like you can just kind of get them right into the
Yeah.
competitive flow right away, right?
Right.
And then you get a whole nother group of people that come in that are just excited to learn a little bit of jiu-jitsu. And then once they get into it, they see some of the other people in class competing, and then they have that, maybe I do want to give competition a try.
Mm-hmm.
And so that group of people are great too, because then as a coach, you can kind of come in and say, hey, let's pick some great, smaller local. When I say local, I mean Arizona in general. So, the
Yeah.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu League, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those are great
Yeah.
events for people like
Yeah.
that, because
Right.
we say that, I mean, let's be honest, competitive jiu-jitsu nowadays is expensive too, right? So, and not just the entry fee, but I just mean like if you want to go compete in a different state, you've got your travel
Right.
costs to get there, food while you're there, all that kind of stuff, hotels
Right.
while you're there, so it easily turns into a couple grand for somebody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I never thought about that, but that is so true.
Right.
Especially the people that are competing all the time and traveling and like trying to make a name for themselves.
Right.
That is crazy. Well, that's why they
Yeah.
have sponsorships and stuff like that, but
Right. But think about that. How many people, especially when they're first starting out and they're broke, are able to get a sponsorship? I
right.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, clothing companies and brands, they want to see
Right.
out and consistently active and that you're doing well. You've got a good following. Social
Yeah.
media is such a big part of sponsorships now. A lot of
Yeah.
companies want to see that you have a bunch of followers and
Yeah.
things like
Right.
that. And so it's just those things are really tough to get. For me, with people that I get that want to compete, I always tell everybody at my academy, at least, that they should never let finances be the only thing that keeps them from competing. And that if
Right.
they really want to compete, we'll help them out. We'll
Yeah.
help them with some of the
Nice.
costs. So, like when we go do big events now, like usually I'll rent like a big 5 or 6 bedroom house,
Awesome.
try to house as many people in there as we can that
Yeah.
couldn't afford to do it otherwise or things like that.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the very first time you competed?
Yeah.
Tell us your experience. How did that go?
Very first time I competed, I had only been training for about 3 months, like 3 months consistently. Went and did my first tournament and didn't know any of the point systems, anything like that.
Ooh.
It was just,
Okay.
I'm going to go out and if
Yeah.
I'm always on top or if I'm submitting people, I'm
Yeah.
probably going to win,
Yeah. Did you have a
but
game plan?
none whatsoever. Just
Nothing.
go
Okay.
out and get after it as hard as you possibly can. And I
Yeah.
had no wrestling background or anything like that. So, started just from scratch. And I was athletic, of course, played sports my whole life,
Yeah.
but that was it. And so that was my first tournament ever was in Indiana, and it was in Indianapolis, Indiana. And my
Uh-huh.
very first match, this was before they did such a good job that they do now with making sure wrestlers don't compete in the novice divisions and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like my very first match as a novice competitor, I had a dude that had been wrestling his whole life, and so he just beat the dog piss out of me. I mean,
Oh
it
man.
was, it was 5 minutes of just me in every defensive position you could possibly imagine. And that was also before they did a good job at creating some of the rule sets. Like you can't just fire in, take somebody down, stand back up again.
Right.
That's what
Right.
this guy would do, because he's such a good
Yeah.
wrestler. And so I just felt like I was seeing my feet up in the air throughout
Yeah.
every part of the match. And so just got slaughtered. But, for me, I loved a challenge. And so
Mm-hmm.
jiu-jitsu was one of the first things that I encountered that I felt like, all right, it doesn't matter it matters a little bit if you're athletic and strong, explosive, all that kind of stuff. But without really knowing what you're doing, like, I would go into the gym and these dudes that were kind of roly poly, were
Yeah.
beating the crap out of me.
Ugh.
So jiu-jitsu was like the first thing that I encountered that I was like, oh man, this is hard. Like I'm really gonna have
Right.
to stay committed and try to get good at this.
Yeah.
And so that first event was it didn't shy me away from competitive jiu-jitsu. It literally I left thinking, okay, I can't wait to do another one. I know I have to work on so much stuff.
Yeah.
It gave me a really good reason to train.
Yeah.
I had a
Yeah.
hard time doing jujitsu just to do jujitsu, but if I was doing jujitsu to get ready for an event, it gave me that motivation to get in there and train
Mm-hmm.
consistently, and
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So as we know, competitions are super nerve-wracking
yeah,
and it's totally a mindset game. So it's not just physical, it's a mental thing too. So
right.
how did you handle your internal battles going into competition?
Yeah, man, I really struggled in that area. I really, really struggled mentally. I was
Yeah.
definitely one of the people that always felt like he trained so much better than he competed. I would get into tournaments and I would have a match, and I remember like looking back at the match mentally afterwards and just being like, man, I feel like I didn't do
Yeah.
any of the things that I
Yeah.
wanted to do or what
Right.
have you. And I had struggled with that a bunch over the years. And in all honesty, it was actually right after I fought Jonathan Van Buren at the very first fight to win that we had in Phoenix. and JBB armbarred me in like 45 seconds,
Ooh.
right out of the gates. And it was, obviously a big pill to swallow. I had a
Yeah.
there and all that kind of stuff. And I
Yeah.
remember coming down off the stage and sitting down. I was really upset and just disappointed in myself. And actually, it was Gustavo Dantes that came up to me. He was just like, "Hey, I noticed that you're struggling a little bit here. Let me
Yeah.
ask you this: what do you think about before you compete?" And I told him that I would think about all the different places I wanted to get to, so I could get to the best part of my game, and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And he gave me a suggestion that really reshaped my competitive journey, moving forward. And once I got to black belt, and he was like, forget about that for a little while. Just think about your first move. Think about the very first thing you want to do and focus on that. So the moment the referee says go, you know exactly what you're going to do. And it almost sounds like, well, yeah, duh. But at the time, it was just a profound statement for me, because
Yeah.
I'd never really focused on that part of the mental preparation for an event. It was always
Yeah.
just, okay, I want to get to my lasso guard, or I want to get, you know what I mean? I want to get
Yeah.
thinking about midpoints in matches, as opposed to so I always found myself struggling to get started. I'd feel like half the match had gone by and I was finally feeling like I was competing, which is
Well,
too
it's also like you don't know what they're going to do.
right. 100%. Yeah.
So do you like, I guess you have to react first, obviously,
Right.
in
Well,
order
for
to
me,
set the
that
pace. Yeah.
right. That made perfect sense for me. So I knew that now at that point moving forward, I had one move that was a fake guard pull to takedown for me. And I knew I was always going to come out, try to
Yeah.
set my initial grip, fake my guard pull, go for my takedown. If I got the takedown, great. I'm starting up by 2 points. If I didn't, then I ended
Mm-hmm.
up in my guard, which is
Yeah.
truthfully kind of where I wanted to be anyway.
Yeah.
It was just such a great piece of advice for me at the perfect time, right? And it really helped me. I went through a losing streak at black belt and immediately started kind of winning matches again, and a couple medals at American Nationals and some different things like that kind of helped
Yeah.
a little bit more confidence in me, and
Yeah.
that piece of advice now is something that I give to my competitors all the time.
Look at that.
'Cause I have a
Love
few
it.
guys that are the exact same way, and girls. They
Yeah.
definitely have that struggle to fire right from the get go. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think
Mm-hmm.
having a coach that has had some competitive struggles, you know what I mean, I think is really
Absolutely.
beneficial sometimes for people too, because they get a chance to see, oh, well,
For
here's something that helped
sure.
me, get out of my slump or what have you.
Right. So you competed all throughout pretty much black belt. So did it get any easier?
I always struggled mentally. It got easier just in the sense that I knew what to expect out of my nerves. Like
Yeah.
I knew that I was going to be very, very nervous, and
Right. So you weren't surprised.
right,
You,
I,
right. It
I
was
just
a familiar feeling. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, you get to a point where the other people that I get that train with me now, they get really, really nervous. It's a matter of how can we harness this nervous energy for our benefit, going
Mm-hmm.
into it, and it's
Yeah.
telling yourself that, hey, this is your body and mind telling you that you're ready. That fight or flight is
Yeah.
kicking in.
Yes.
It's how do I handle this kind of feeling? And dude, it's funny, like right all the way through up, competed for 20 straight years. And even right up to the last time I competed, I remember as a black belt being in the warm up area and I start having that, why am I even doing this?
Yeah.
I couldn't get home with my family and I dedicated all this time. I could have spent more time building my business. And those are all just, they're the start of excuses that you start to,
Yeah.
and so being able to kind of shake your head a little bit, knock those things out and just say, no, 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 no. You're here because you get to be here, not because
Yeah.
you have to be here. You get
Right.
to do this stuff. You don't have to do this stuff.
Right. Right. Do you have any requirements for your students to compete?
Not for just my basic hobbyist that just really wants to kind of try competitive jiu-jitsu and give it a feel it out a little bit and see if it's something that they're going to enjoy. I have no problem getting somebody, starting somebody competing really early on in their jiu-jitsu path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I always tell them, what I love about jiu-jitsu competition is there are divisions for people that have been training 6 months or less.
Yeah.
So if you want to go and do like a naga as an example is a great one for people that are new to competing and especially in no-gi jiu-jitsu.
Right.
Like they're going to get a few matches, they can register the day of, it's,
Yeah.
it's all that kind of stuff. And so I have no problem with somebody coming in that's brand new to jiu-jitsu and saying they really want to compete and getting them out there. Just, I always try to make sure they recognize that, in the event that it doesn't go the way they expect, like they have a real tough go, a loss, any of that kind of stuff, they get beat real quick, is just to remind them that that's part of the way it works when you're just starting out and learning,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
So now,
you,
that said, any of the bigger events, like especially the invite only events where it's only to be the one match that's, streamed or what have you, that's a little different just because, in my opinion, as a coach, part of my job is to prepare them adequately for a particular match and to not, to put them in positions where I don't feel like they're going to be embarrassed on a big stage.
Right. Right.
And so if there's someone that's a little bit newer and they want to do one of those events, normally it's not even possible anyway, but some of the different ones, some of the local ones are starting to include white belts and stuff in some of these invite matches and things.
Yeah.
So, if it's something like that, like honestly, I think some of the biggest disparities in competitive jiu-jitsu happen at white belt and black belt. When you're a white belt and you're brand new, the difference between a white belt with no stripes and a 4-stripe white belt they're polar opposite people.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Right. And so there's that big discrepancy that exists there.
Yeah.
So, if somebody's brand spanking new and they might get a matchup against somebody who's almost a blue belt, I might try to help them either find a different match or let's hold off a little bit until
that makes sense.
Yeah, where we feel a little bit better about what we can do,
Yeah.
And then at black belt, honestly, it's the exact same. Somebody who first gets their black belt and somebody who's been a black belt for like 6-9 years. I mean, that's a big, somebody who's had all that time competing at black belt. So they know that level change, because I think for me, at least, going from brown belt to black belt competitively, I noticed a big shift, like, shit, these guys are really good.
Yeah.
The margin for error just got so much smaller,
Right.
Yeah. And so same thing goes. If I get folks that are brand new black belts and they want to get out there, I'll try to help them find matches that are going to be good introductory matches to black belt competition. You know what I mean?
Right. Yep. No, totally. That makes sense. Do you offer any competition classes?
Yep.
You do.
So we have one like true comp team training class on our actual physical schedule, right? Now, that said, we always do different things with competitors. Like if we have people genuinely trying to make a real run at competitive jiu-jitsu and they're younger, then we do have strength conditioning and things like that we work with, even dietitian to help with weight cutting and all that kind of stuff. And, so try to create a professional experience for them, when we can.
So how do you run your competition classes? Like, how's the preparation like? Do you talk about mindset too? Like, how do you go ahead?
So in the actual comp team training class, we'll use that as a space, depending on what we have coming up. Like if there's going to be a big gi competition, like the Pans or gi worlds or something like that, then our comp team training class will be heavily focused on the gi, right? And we'll spend all our time talking about that. And we'll use the comp team training class as a place to talk about, like if we get some newer competitors, we'll talk about point systems and we talk about scoring. We'll print out a copy of the IBJJF rule system and I keep it down by the mat so that you can refer to it. If you have questions about that kind of stuff. And pretty much that.
And so how do you guide your students regarding cutting weight, like weight classes and things like that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one with hobbyists. It's not as much of a tricky one for people that literally want to try to make a career at a professional grappling, right? Because then weight cutting is a lot. It's a part of the game, like trying to be the heaviest weight in a bracket is a good thing. Now I'll say, right, that some people are just different. So I think a big part of being a coach is really getting a feel for that particular competitor, right? Like some people that grew up wrestling and weight cutting, weight cutting is a process for them. They don't need any guidance. They've done it 100 times before. They know they can be 8 pounds over the night before. They're going to sleep off 4. They're going to use 4 to burn. they have it down, right?
Right.
But people that are newer, and
It's a lot
especially
different.
people that, it's a challenge, right? Like if you've never cut weight before, even
Right.
just the understanding of what that means, the difference between, restricting your calories ahead of time, right? Compared to like cutting water weight, right
Yep.
before you compete, or different things like that, right? They're different mechanisms. So
Right.
when I get a hobbyist that is interested in competing, I usually try to help them make the decision that weight cutting is just not something they need to concern themselves with as much. If
Mm-hmm.
maybe a little bit of a weight cut, and when I say little, I mean 5 pounds or less, right? And the reason I'm okay with maybe just that little bit of a weight cut is some people I've found it helps them get mentally ready because it's like
Right.
they're
They take it
already
more
competing against the
seriously.
scale,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're already competing against the scale, and so for
Yep.
them, a really good mental victory happens when they make weight. It's like, oh, all right, the hardest part of my preparation
Yeah.
is now done. I only have to worry about jujitsu. You
Right.
know, so for some people, I think it really helps, but then for other people, it ends up being way too big of a part of their preparation. They forget about everything else and they only focus on cutting the weight. And then by the time they get to
Right.
actually compete, they feel horrible. They're just depleted because they didn't have a very good weight cut.
Yeah.
They don't feel prepared because they didn't really get the training they needed because they were cutting so
Yep.
much over a period of time that
You
they
see it all the time.
right
Yeah.
all the time. Yeah. And so yeah, so I guess the long story short, right? I kind of group them into two categories, and it depends whether they're a hobbyist just trying to have some fun with
Mm-hmm.
competitive jiu-jitsu, and it's
Right.
somebody that's like, hey, I want to make a name for myself in competitive
Right.
jiu-jitsu.
Right.
One day I want to be a black belt adult world champion. Like, okay, well, that's different. Yeah.
Okay, what is one piece of advice you can give somebody that is going to compete for the very first time?
Yeah, well, if they're going to compete for the very first time and they're a hobbyist and they're just literally doing something for fun that's going to be healthy for them, then I would tell them to focus on their goal, which is to have fun.
There
I
you
would
go.
focus on that. And nerves and all that kind of stuff can be a part of the fun, like it's exhilarating to get nervous, right? Like
Right.
that energizes us, it wakes us up, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
it's not to say that we try to eradicate all the nerves because I don't think that's even humanly possible anyway.
No.
But
Right.
it's all right, how can I create an environment for myself that I can do this and still have fun with it? Like, I don't know if you've ever golfed before, but
No. It's on my list.
yeah, right. So when the pandemic struck, all of a sudden we were all told we couldn't open our gyms anymore. And so I was like, I'm going to pick up golf. And so I literally took the energy that I put into jiu-jitsu and I immediately put it into golf. And I was going
Love it.
playing 36 holes a day and practicing my chip
Nice.
shots and practicing my putts and all that kind of stuff, just
Well,
trying to get as good as I possibly could at golf. And it's funny because I noticed so many similarities, between like the mental component that exists in golf and that
yeah.
of jiu-jitsu, and there's just
Interesting.
so
Yeah.
right, there's so many parallels between the two because you could have great technique in both aspects, and if you can't mentally pull it together, it's just not going to work out well for you. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I honestly forget your initial question, to be quite honest. What did you ask initially?
Uh, hold I was actually listening to so what advice would you give to somebody that's gonna compete for the first
Right.
time?
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
right. So golf, getting back to the
yeah,
analogy, right.
yeah, yeah.
Golf for me was supposed to be a fun hobby. And I turned it into a very unfun thing for a little while, right? Like if I hit a bad
Yeah.
shot, I'm cussing mad. And, I'd come home from a day of golf and I would just be angry because I played so horribly,
Yeah.
It gets to a point where you look at it and you say, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be doing this for fun, to
Yeah.
relieve stress. And so not putting so much pressure on yourself, right? To be perfect all the time, especially when you're first starting out with competitive jiu-jitsu.
Love that advice.
Like as a
Yeah.
coach, I've had a few students that have, when they started competing, they had a real tough time winning any matches. They were competing all the time. And I remember I was actually just out having a drink with one of the students one night. And he was just going through it like, man, I just can't seem to win. And I was like, dude, can
Oh,
I be honest with you? Like you've competed at least 10, 15 times as a coach. I couldn't tell you how many of those you've won. I couldn't even tell you if I had no idea that you'd never won a match. No idea. You know, the only person that knows that is you. Like, you know what I've noticed as a coach? How much better you've gotten over the last 10
I
matches.
mean, and it's the fact that he goes out there and continues to compete too
Right,
and put himself out there. So that's
right.
awesome.
And what does that do for life outside of jiu-jitsu, right? Like jiu-jitsu for
Yeah.
me was one of the main, I always call it the superpower in life, you know, like if you can get all the way through to black belt, you know, I
Yeah.
would say, man, that should teach you that
Right.
if you stay committed to something, you can become at least proficient at it. You
Yeah.
know, it might be hard, might take a lot of work and time, but you can do it if you really choose to do it. You know,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. Well, we've seen your team out at the Arizona Jiu-Jitsu League.
yeah.
So thank you for supporting, by the way. But we want to know from you, how has your experience been with our events?
Yeah, been good. I think, you know, one of the things I really loved about like when I first moved here and went and did some of the first Arizona Jiu-Jitsu League tournaments, I honestly loved how well they were run, you know, compared
That's good to
to
hear.
other
Yep.
smaller local tournaments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the great thing about so students that I had that were interested in doing more IBJJF events, like bigger events like the Pans, the Worlds,
Mm-hmm.
Nationals, you know, all the bigger ones,
Yeah.
the Grand Slam events. AZ BJJL gave them a very good introduction to how it's going to feel with a ring coordinator or a mat coordinator having to weigh in the exact same way, getting your gi checked. You
I
know,
mean, it's the same rule set too.
exactly.
So
Right,
yeah.
exactly. And not only the same rule set, but it's the same system, right? Like
Right.
it just feels very
Right.
similar to the
Yep.
IBJJF. And so I loved that, right? Because I came from, you know, tournaments that you would have a local tournament and the first question you would get asked is, all right, who can ref today? You know,
Oh my
it was just
God.
like that was how it was back in the day. And so
Wow.
when I first came in, and that, you know, Gustavo's tournament was one of the first ones that I went to that I was like, oh
Yeah.
shit, this is organized, you know, as this feels like a business, which is,
Yeah.
you know, so I love that it has that, you know, kind of precursor for people that want to get into more like bigger IBJJF.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for supporting again. We'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
And also, thank you so much for your time today. It was so nice getting to know you.
Yeah.
Where can people find out more about you and the school?
Yeah. So we have two locations in Tucson. You go to undisputedaz.com. That's our gym website. And we've got, you know, tons of information about me as an instructor on there and all that kind of stuff. And the honest answer is anytime anybody's in Tucson, we don't charge drop-in fees for people that
Yeah, that's
in
awesome.
training. So wide open doors, not
Cool.
only wide open. We would love it if you came by, train with us whenever you're in town.
Awesome. Well, I got to come visit.
Yeah, doors are open.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, David.
Yeah.
And we look forward to seeing you at the events.
Yeah. Same to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.